The room was silent except for the ticking clock on the wall, each second piercing like a blade. Jonathan Parker, 34, sat stiffly in the leather chair across from his boss, his palms damp and trembling. He had built his life around this company, sacrificing weekends, missing birthdays, and pouring every ounce of himself into the dream that had once seemed limitless. His boss, Mr. Reynolds, leaned back, his eyes cold and detached. Jonathan said, "You can't be serious after everything I've given." But the answer came with no mercy. Mr. Reynolds said, "It's over, Jonathan. We're letting you go." The words landed like a hammer, smashing through his chest, leaving him breathless. The office lights felt too bright, exposing his vulnerability. Jonathan thought of his wife waiting at home, the mortgage payment due, and the team he had once inspired. He whispered, "This can't be happening," but deep inside he knew this moment would define the rest of his life. Jonathan stumbled out of the office, his chest tight, his breath shallow. The hallway stretched endlessly, each step echoing like a cruel reminder of the fall. He kept replaying Mr. Reynolds' words in his mind, unable to escape them. Jonathan said, "I gave everything, and they tossed me aside like I was nothing." His colleagues avoided his eyes, whispers trailing behind him like smoke. The once familiar walls now felt like prison bars closing in. He pushed open the glass doors and stepped outside, the chill wind slapping his face. The city moved around him in perfect rhythm, oblivious to the collapse of his world. His phone buzzed in his pocket, his wife's name glowing on the screen. He couldn't answer. Not yet. Not until he figured out how to tell her the truth. His throat tightened and he muttered under his breath, "This isn't the end. It can't be." But deep down, doubt clung to every word. Outside, the noise of the city hit him like a storm, car horns blaring, footsteps rushing, voices overlapping. Jonathan stood frozen on the sidewalk, gripping his briefcase like a lifeline. His mind spiraled with fear, shame, and rage. He muttered, "I worked late nights, I sacrificed everything, and still it wasn't enough." People brushed past him, eyes fixed on their own destinations, unaware of his implosion. He turned his gaze upward, skyscrapers towering like giants mocking his downfall. The world carried on, merciless and indifferent. A hot sting filled his eyes, but he clenched his jaw, refusing to break here, in the open. He inhaled sharply, whispering to himself, "Stand up, Jonathan. Don't fall apart now." Yet his legs trembled beneath him. A storm was building, not just in the sky above but in his soul, ready to consume everything he thought he was. The sky darkened as clouds gathered, shadows stretching across the streets. Jonathan walked aimlessly, each step heavy, his thoughts louder than the traffic. He said, "What will I tell her? That I failed? That I lost everything?" His reflection in a shop window stopped him, tired eyes, defeated posture, a stranger staring back. He placed his hand against the cold glass, feeling the weight of shame press against him. A passerby bumped his shoulder, muttering angrily, but Jonathan barely noticed. The world felt detached, every sound muffled by the storm inside his head. He whispered to his reflection, "You're not done. You can't be done." Yet even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him, relentless and cruel. The clouds above rumbled like an omen, echoing the chaos within. He straightened his jacket and forced his feet forward, clinging to the thin thread of resilience still left in him. Rain began to fall, droplets tapping against his shoulders and face, mixing with the heat of unshed tears. Jonathan moved slowly, unbothered by the downpour, his suit darkening with each step. He said, "Maybe this is the cleansing I needed. Maybe this storm is here for me." Around him, people rushed for cover, but he let the rain soak him, as if it might wash away his shame. The city lights flickered in the puddles, distorted and broken, a mirror of his own fractured spirit. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and stared at his wife's name on the screen again. His thumb hovered over the call button, his heart hammering. He muttered, "She deserves the truth." With a shaky breath he pressed the button, the dial tone filling the air like a countdown to his reckoning. Jonathan sat in his car, the rain hammering against the windshield in relentless waves. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles pale, his breath fogging up the glass. The world outside blurred into streaks of neon and water, but inside, his thoughts roared louder than any storm. He whispered, "I can't walk through that door and tell her I failed, not like this." His wife Emily had always been his anchor, steady and unwavering, but now he felt like an anchor dragging her down. Memories of their early struggles came flooding back: cheap apartments, long nights, whispered promises to build a better life. He had promised her more, and now he had less than nothing. Jonathan pressed his forehead to the steering wheel, muttering, "What kind of man am I if I can't even protect her from this?" His chest tightened, but beneath the despair, a spark flickered, whispering that this couldn't be the end. At home, Emily waited, her phone clutched tightly, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. Emily Parker, 32, sat curled on the couch, her blonde hair tied loosely, her sweater oversized, her face pale with worry. The clock ticked louder than her heartbeat, each minute of silence heavier than the last. She said softly, "Please come home, John." The rain outside battered the windows, matching her storm of fear. She thought of the times she had told him to slow down, to rest, to not carry everything on his shoulders alone. He never listened. He always said, "I'm doing this for us." She whispered those words back to herself, trembling. The sound of keys at the door finally broke the silence, and her breath caught. She wasn't ready for the truth, but she knew it had arrived, whether she wanted it or not. Jonathan stepped into the apartment, rain dripping from his suit, his shoes leaving dark prints across the wooden floor. Emily rushed toward him, her face etched with concern, but froze at the look in his eyes. Jonathan said, "Emily, they let me go." His voice cracked like broken glass. Emily covered her mouth, her eyes filling with tears, yet she stayed still, as if moving might shatter him further. The silence stretched heavy between them, broken only by the hum of the refrigerator and the rain beyond the glass. Finally she whispered, "We'll get through this, John, together." But Jonathan shook his head, pacing the room, his hands pulling at his damp tie. He muttered, "I don't know if I can. I don't know if I'm enough." Her arms reached for him, but he turned away, lost in the crushing weight of his failure. Jonathan sat on the edge of their bed later that night, his head in his hands, staring at the floor, as if answers might rise from the wood. Emily sat beside him, her hand brushing his arm gently, her voice soft but steady. She said, "You are not your job, John. You are more than this." He wanted to believe her, but every nerve screamed the opposite. The silence between them was broken only by the distant thunder rolling outside. Jonathan muttered, "I was supposed to build something lasting. I was supposed to give you the life we dreamed of." Emily leaned closer, whispering, "Dreams don't die because of one fall. We still have us." Her words pierced through the fog of despair, but they also deepened the ache inside him. He wanted to believe, but belief felt like a mountain he no longer had the strength to climb. Later, Jonathan stood alone on the balcony, the city lights stretching endlessly beneath him, the storm now reduced to a drizzle. His tie hung loose, his shirt clinging damp to his frame. He stared into the distance, whispering, "Am I meant to start over, or is this the end of everything?" His reflection glimmered faintly in the glass door, reminding him of the stranger he saw earlier. Emily's voice echoed in his mind, "We still have us." But doubt battled against it, fierce and unrelenting. He clenched the railing, the cool metal grounding him in the present. For the first time that night, he inhaled deeply, letting the crisp post-rain air fill his lungs. A fragile thought surfaced, a spark of defiance. Maybe this wasn't just an ending. Maybe it was a beginning he hadn't yet imagined. Jonathan sat at his small desk the next morning, his laptop open but screen blank, the cursor blinking like a silent accusation. His resume looked outdated, his savings account dangerously low, and every thought screamed failure. He muttered, "How do I start again when I have nothing left to offer?" Emily's voice from the kitchen called gently, "You've still got everything that matters, John." He wanted to believe her, but doubt weighed heavier. He scrolled through job listings, each rejection email from the night before replaying in his head. The company he built his life around had erased him, and the world seemed eager to remind him of his irrelevance. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening as a surge of anger overtook the despair. Jonathan whispered, "No one is going to bury me alive." But beneath his defiance, fear still stalked his every thought, relentless and sharp. Later that day, Jonathan met his old friend Mark Davis, 35, in a small diner. Mark had always been his loyal confidant, someone who once believed in his ideas without hesitation. Jonathan pushed his coffee cup away, muttering, "They threw me out like trash, Mark." Mark leaned forward, his tone firm, "That doesn't erase who you are. You've still got vision, John." But Jonathan shook his head, bitterness creeping in. He said, "Vision doesn't pay rent. It doesn't feed Emily. It doesn't erase this failure." The clatter of plates and hum of voices around them felt like background noise to Jonathan's storm. Mark's eyes softened and he whispered, "Don't let them decide your worth." Jonathan stared down at the black coffee swirling, caught between anger and despair, the words echoing but refusing to sink in. Jonathan returned home to a stack of unpaid bills waiting on the table. He stared at them in silence, each envelope heavier than the last, each number a reminder of his crumbling security. Emily entered quietly, setting groceries down with a tired sigh. She said softly, "We'll figure it out, John. We always do." But Jonathan slammed his hand on the table, startling her. He muttered, "I promised you better than this. I promised we'd never be here again." Emily's eyes watered, but she steadied herself. She said, "I don't need promises, I need you to fight." Jonathan's chest rose sharply, rage at himself mixing with the helplessness of their situation. He turned away, ashamed of his outburst, but unable to control the storm boiling inside. That night, Jonathan met with his mentor, Richard Cole, 58, in a quiet bar tucked away from the city noise. Richard's gray beard and calm eyes carried decades of hard lessons. Jonathan nursed a drink, his voice low. He said, "I don't know how to get back up this time." Richard leaned closer, his tone firm but compassionate. "Then stop trying to get back up as the man you were. Become the man you need to be." Jonathan's jaw tightened as Richard's words cut through him. He wanted to resist, but something in his chest stirred. Richard said, "Failure doesn't destroy you, Jonathan. It shapes you. Let it shape you into someone greater." Jonathan sat silent, his glass trembling in his hand. He realized the storm wasn't ending. He had to learn to walk through it. The next morning, Jonathan stood in front of his old office building. The towering glass facade reflected the rising sun, sharp and unforgiving. His chest tightened, memories of betrayal pressing like a weight on his lungs. He muttered, "They took everything from me." His reflection in the glass looked small, fragile, but his fists clenched, his spine straightened. He whispered, "I won't let this be the last chapter." The city roared around him, indifferent, but inside Jonathan, a war raged between despair and defiance. He turned away, his steps slow but deliberate, knowing he could never return to who he was. This was the beginning of something else, though he didn't yet know what. For the first time since losing everything, he felt the faint pull of possibility, like a thin beam of light breaking through storm clouds. Jonathan sat in a small co-working cafe, laptop open, determined to sketch ideas for his future. The air buzzed with conversations, the clink of cups, and the faint hum of ambition all around him. He scrolled through an article that made his stomach twist. His former business partner, Daniel Hayes, 36, had just announced a new company built on the very concept Jonathan once pitched. Jonathan whispered, "No, this can't be real." His pulse quickened, each headline sharper than the last. Emily's voice over the phone cut in. "What happened, John?" His throat tightened as he muttered, "Daniel stole everything. My idea, my designs, even my pitch deck." The cafe walls seemed to close in, the chatter turning into static in his ears. Betrayal burned hotter than failure ever did. He slammed his laptop shut, his reflection glaring back in the black screen. A man robbed not just of work, but of trust. Jonathan stormed into Mark Davis's apartment later that night, his anger spilling over. He shoved his phone at Mark, showing Daniel's press release. Jonathan said, "He stole everything, Mark. Everything we worked on together." Mark's eyes widened, his face tightening. He muttered, "John, Daniel came to me months ago. He asked for advice. I didn't know he would do this." Jonathan's chest heaved, betrayal cutting from two directions at once. He shouted, "You knew? You knew, and didn't warn me?" Mark raised his hands, his voice cracking. "I thought it was nothing. I thought you were safe." Jonathan stepped back, his jaw clenched, his body trembling with rage and disbelief. The silence after his words felt heavier than any storm. The friendship once solid, now fractured by trust, turned to ash. Alone on the streets after leaving Mark's, Jonathan's anger burned hotter with every step. The neon glow of bars and billboards smeared across the wet pavement, mirroring the chaos in his mind. He muttered under his breath, "First Reynolds, now Daniel. Everyone I trusted turned on me." The betrayal carved deeper wounds than losing his job ever had. He clenched his fists, the night air sharp in his lungs, his heart pounding with fury. A group of strangers laughed as they passed, oblivious to his storm. Jonathan stopped at a crosswalk, staring at the endless lights ahead, whispering, "How much more can I lose before there's nothing left of me?" The city's roar drowned his voice, but the question echoed in his chest. Betrayal had stripped him bare, forcing him to face not just loss, but the cruel truth that even trust could be stolen. The next morning, Jonathan confronted Daniel Hayes, 36, in his gleaming new office. The contrast was brutal. Daniel in a tailored navy suit, confident smirk, sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. Jonathan slammed a folder on the desk, his voice low but sharp. "You built this on my blood and sweat." Daniel leaned back, unfazed, and replied coldly, "Business isn't about loyalty, Jonathan. It's about survival. You were too slow, too naive." The words sliced deeper than any knife. Jonathan's hands shook, but he forced his spine straight. He said, "You'll regret this." Daniel chuckled softly, dismissive. "No, John, you'll regret not being me." Rage threatened to consume him, but beneath it burned a dangerous spark. Resolve, the kind that betrayal can forge into steel. Jonathan left Daniel's office with his chest burning, his reflection caught in the towering glass door as it closed behind him. The betrayal had gutted him, but it also ignited something fierce inside. He muttered, "If they think I'm finished, they're wrong." The city stretched before him, indifferent but filled with possibility. Emily's words echoed faintly, "Dreams don't die because of one fall." He clenched his fists, whispering, "This isn't the end. This is war." His reflection in the glass no longer looked broken. It looked dangerous. The twist of betrayal had torn away his illusions, but it had also given him clarity. He walked into the sunlight, scarred but unbowed, knowing his next steps would no longer be about survival, but about taking back everything that had been stolen. Jonathan sat across from investor Victoria Lane, 45, in a towering boardroom overlooking the city skyline. His pitch deck glowed on the large screen, his hands trembling but his voice steady. He said, "I'm not here to sell you a product. I'm here to prove that failure doesn't define a person." Victoria's sharp eyes scanned the slides, her silence suffocating. Jonathan's throat tightened, memories of Daniel's betrayal flashing like ghosts behind him. But he pressed forward, declaring, "What Daniel stole wasn't just an idea. It was proof that innovation lives in me, and I will fight to make it real again." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging heavy in the air. He knew this was more than business. It was survival, redemption, and war all rolled into one. Victoria leaned back, tapping her pen against the table, her voice cool. She said, "I've seen dozens of pitches this week, Jonathan. Why should yours matter?" Jonathan's chest heaved, but he refused to flinch. He said, "Because I've already lost everything. I have nothing left to protect, which means I'll risk everything to win." His words hit the room like a thunderclap. For a moment, Victoria's expression softened, though her eyes still tested him. Jonathan steadied his breath, whispering to himself, "This is it, don't let fear own you." He glanced at the city skyline shimmering behind her, and for the first time in weeks, he felt the faint flicker of control return. The meeting stretched on, each question from Victoria sharper than the last. Jonathan answered with growing conviction, his voice fueled by defiance and raw honesty. He said, "You want to know why this matters? Because people like Daniel will always bet on greed. But I'm betting on resilience, on vision, on never quitting even when the world spits you out." His words cracked with emotion, but they carried a fire he had never unleashed before. Victoria studied him, her pen frozen mid-air. For the first time, Jonathan saw something flicker in her eyes, respect. He swallowed hard, whispering inside, "This is my fight. This is where I rise." As the pitch ended, Victoria set her pen down slowly, her gaze locked on Jonathan. The silence stretched unbearably until she finally said, "I'll back you. But understand, this isn't mercy. This isn't mercy. Fail and you take me down with you." Jonathan's chest surged with both fear and exhilaration. He nodded firmly, his voice steady, "I won't fail." In that moment he felt the world tilt, the weight of betrayal transforming into the fuel of redemption. His palms were still damp, his suit clung to his back, but his spirit stood taller than ever before. He muttered to himself, "This is where it begins." As Jonathan stepped out of the skyscraper into the bustling city, the air felt lighter, the noise no longer suffocating. He paused, staring up at the endless sky, the sun breaking through clouds like a promise. He whispered, "Daniel thought he ended me. He just gave me the reason to rise higher." The betrayal still stung. The scars were still fresh, but for the first time, Jonathan felt strength in them. He straightened his tie, the city rushing around him, and muttered, "This isn't survival anymore. This is war, and I'm ready." His reflection in the glass doors no longer looked broken. It looked like a man reborn. Jonathan sat at his dining table late at night, papers spread across the surface, contracts, notes, sketches, all illuminated by the soft glow of a single lamp. Emily walked in quietly with 2 cups of tea, setting one beside him. She smiled gently, saying, "You look like a man starting over." Jonathan leaned back, exhaustion and determination mingling in his eyes. He replied, "I feel like I've already lived a lifetime in these last weeks, but somehow, I'm still standing." Emily touched his shoulder, her voice warm. "Standing isn't enough. You're building again, John. That's who you are." He looked at her, realizing she had been his anchor through every storm. He whispered, "I almost lost myself, but I won't lose us." The weight of betrayal still lingered, but the foundation of something stronger was beginning to take shape. The following week, Jonathan met with a small group of young entrepreneurs in a modest co-working space. They leaned forward eagerly as he spoke, his voice carrying conviction he hadn't felt in months. He said, "Your worth isn't measured by rejection. It's measured by what you build after it." The group nodded, scribbling notes, their faces alive with inspiration. For the first time, Jonathan realized his story wasn't just about survival. It was a lesson others needed. Mark Davis, sitting quietly in the corner, raised his hand and said softly, "I was wrong not to warn you, John. Let me help now." Jonathan paused, studying his oldest friend, then nodded slowly. The fractures of betrayal were healing into scars that carried strength, not weakness. Jonathan visited his mentor Richard Cole, 58, in his quiet office lined with shelves of worn books and framed photographs. Richard poured 2 glasses of whiskey, sliding one across. He said, "You look different, John. Failure's no longer breaking you, it's building." Jonathan lifted the glass, his voice steady. "You told me to become the man I needed to be. I think I'm finally beginning to understand what that means." Richard chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Good. Just don't forget, storms don't last, but men forged in storms never break again." Jonathan nodded, the amber liquid reflecting the fire now lit inside him. For the first time in weeks, he felt gratitude for the very pain that had nearly destroyed him. Jonathan stood in his small new workspace, bare walls, a second-hand desk, and a whiteboard scrawled with fresh ideas. Emily entered carrying a box of supplies, setting it down with a playful grin. She said, "Every empire starts somewhere, right?" Jonathan smiled faintly, replying, "Then let's start here." He placed a hand on the whiteboard, tracing the outlines of his new vision, the sketches of concepts he had once abandoned, but now reclaimed. Emily wrapped her arms around him from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. He whispered, "This time, no one will take it from me." The room was quiet, but in that silence, the pulse of new beginnings beat strong, steady, and full of promise. That evening, Jonathan stepped out onto the balcony, looking over the city, bathed in golden twilight. The skyline no longer loomed as an enemy, but stretched out like an open battlefield, waiting for him to claim. He whispered, "This isn't just recovery, this is rebirth." His reflection in the glass door behind him showed a man scarred but unbroken. Emily joined him, slipping her hand into his, her voice soft. "Together, we'll build it stronger this time." Jonathan's eyes glistened, his chest rising with a deep breath of hope. He muttered, "They thought I was finished, but they've only seen the beginning." As the sun dipped, the city lights flickered on, echoing the spark that had reignited inside him. Jonathan stood on stage at a small entrepreneurial conference, his name announced with polite applause. The lights above blinded him briefly, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw a sea of young dreamers staring back. He smiled faintly, gripping the podium. He said, "Months ago, I thought my story ended in an office where I lost everything. But losing everything isn't the end. It's the start of what you're truly meant to build." The audience leaned in, drawn by the weight in his voice. His scars weren't invisible. They were his credentials. He whispered, more to himself than them, "I was fired. I was betrayed. But I'm still here." And with those words, the room erupted in applause, not just for a man who survived, but for one who refused to quit. After the talk, Jonathan stepped down from the stage, greeted by eager faces asking questions, shaking his hand, thanking him. Each gesture felt surreal. Not long ago he had been alone, drowning in doubt. Emily watched from the side, pride shining in her eyes. She said softly, when he approached, "I've never seen you like this, John." He took her hand, replying with quiet certainty, "I've never felt like this before. Not broken, not scared, just alive." The air around them hummed with hope. Emily squeezed his hand, whispering, "This is only the beginning." He nodded, realizing she was right. His fall had only sharpened his climb. That evening, Jonathan and Emily sat on their balcony, the city glowing beneath them like a canvas of opportunity. He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion tugging at him, but for once it felt good. He said, "I thought I was finished, Em, but maybe being broken was the only way to rebuild." Emily leaned her head against his shoulder, replying, "Sometimes the cracks let the light in." He chuckled softly, wrapping his arm around her. The city's hum felt different now, not indifferent, but alive with possibility. His failures had become fuel, and his scars had become proof. For the first time, the future didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a challenge he was ready to embrace. Days later, Jonathan walked past his old office tower, the same glass facade that once reflected his defeat. He paused, staring at the entrance where he had stumbled out, broken months before. This time he didn't feel small. He felt unshakable. He whispered, "You ended me once, but I became something you can't erase." His reflection stared back from the glass, but it wasn't the same man who had collapsed in despair. It was a man tempered by betrayal, sharpened by loss, and lit by resilience. He turned away with a steady smile, walking forward without hesitation. The tower loomed behind him, but for the first time, it no longer had power over him. On a quiet morning, Jonathan jogged along the riverbank, the rising sun painting the sky in gold. His breath was steady, his body alive with energy, his mind clear. He whispered between breaths, "I'm not the man who lost his job. I'm the man who found his fight." The water shimmered with light, the city skyline rising beyond, no longer a symbol of loss, but a horizon of opportunity. Emily waited on a bench ahead, smiling as he slowed to join her. Together, they looked out at the sunrise. Jonathan said softly, "The day I was fired was the day my life changed forever." And thank God it did. The sun broke fully over the horizon, bathing them in brilliance, sealing his rebirth in fire and light.